In relation to what the Honourable Member Joe Harmon had said, in why it is that this bill ought not to go to the select committee because it is substantively the same, well, if it is substantively the same, then why did it take so long for it to be laid in this Honourable House? This was a promise made while you were in campaign for a 100-day, in your 100-day promise. At point 19, actually, it says that you're going to liberalize the ICT sector, the telecoms and ICT sector. Well, it's been over 400 days. And if it's substantively the same, it should have been laid at your very first session or within the very first few months of your sessions. And in relation to what the Honourable Member Carl Greenidge had said in interrupting my colleague and comrade Julian Burton, that the sector was already run by one entity, it is not a boon for you to say that a successful telecommunications sector that was profitable, you had privatized on monopolistic terms. That is not something that you should be proud of. But you know, and what GT&T did was, all they did was catch a paku and bossy back. But I am surprised that you would now stand up here and try to justify the monopolistic contract that was entered that has trapped Guyana for a very long time. But you know, as old people say, easy lesson, hard for dance. As Mr. Speaker, as a civilization, we are sitting at a very exciting time in our lives. And we see rapid change happening all around us. And the most important external force in our daily lives today is the networks that connect us. I remember in 2008 and 2009, it would take 5 minutes before you logged into your Hotmail, your email account, where smartphones were not even dumb phones. And now they're so ubiquitous that everybody is always on their phone scanning their Facebook or making calls through their WhatsApp or getting in touch with people all around the world, right here in Guyana. So the changes that are happening very rapidly at a pace that has never happened before and right before our very eyes. But I can assure you that as we evolve from this old age analog technology into new modern and digital technology, and we shape how that is done, all the changes that we have seen taken place in the last maybe 8-10 years or so will seem like a stroll in the park when you consider the next 5 to 10 years. What will happen in the next 5 to 10 years? And maybe 2 years ago, a lot of people would not have even known about WhatsApp and making calls to people all around the world. In the developed world, applications such as Uber has now transformed taxi companies and people who provide those services. That has changed it forever, where they've brought down prices for consumers. And if you're not up to the time with that technology, as a consumer you're losing, but also you're going to be caught on the back foot as a policymaker. And that's why we're always concerned about age-old personnel trying to shape new age technology. And what is going to be the defining force of the future is not going to be 4G, it's going to be 5G. 5G is going to be the connector of things, the enabler, the internet and the enabler of things, where robots are going to be able to talk to each other There's going to be all your devices, all your appliances in your house are going to be connected. You're going to have self-driving cars. You're going to have artificial intelligence. Those are things that we have to be aware of as we are moving forward, because it's going to be happening very quickly, and you're going to have to shape the policy and the framework within which that is provided. And the demand that the networks now face, for example, where it is expected that by 2020 you're going to have 1 gigabyte of data being used by every person. If that was happening today, the networks would fall apart. You're going to have to open new spectrum, because right now mobile carriers would run on between the spectrum of 800 to 2500 megahertz. 5G will be running on 73,000 megahertz or 73 gigahertz. Those are things that you've got to be aware of, and you've got to set out the framework now so that you will set the place for the future. And part of that is laying this ICT legislation so as it is rightfully says to improve access, to improve competition, but also you've got to balance that against the consumer protection and national security. But it's not a sector that we can overregulate, which is very different from the financial sector, which, as a product of the financial sector, we debated 2 weeks ago, the insurance bill. Finance is something that you have to be very careful about regulating, because the consequences of failure is systemic. Technology, on the other hand, the changes for technology happen so quickly that you can't overregulate. You've got to be much more loose about your regulation, especially as it relates to data, internet, and broadband. And so the phrase in ICT, less is best. But in order to deal with the bill properly, I have to deal with the Minister's presentation, the Honourable Minister's presentation. And the Honourable Member Joe Hamilton is correct. The Minister missed a big opportunity. This has been a long-awaited piece of legislation. Long awaited. It's been long discussed. It's been in the pipeline for a very long time. And she missed the opportunity, despite whatever text she may receive from members of the other side. She missed a big opportunity to explain to the nation how is it going to benefit them. In addition to that, you failed to set out the vision for the future for the government. This is where the place that you should have made that statement. What it is that you expect to happen, not only for consumers, but also the service providers. And you missed that big opportunity. It's not only about saying...
Honourable Member, you are speaking on the merits of the bill, are you?
Yes, I am.
I remind you that the requirement here is to speak on the merits of the bill. Please proceed.
It's not only about saying, well, this part relates to this part and this part relates to this part. This is your public conversation, not only with this National Assembly, but to people outside in the communities and all across our country, and to the investors all around the world. This is being streamed all around the world. And even if you are only able to capture one investor, that's one investor more than you could ever have had. And you also, Guyana's market, in addition, is also a very unique market because it's a very large geographic area and low density. One of the major positions that this bill has adopted, which is of great benefit, has been the concept of net neutrality. And as much as the Honourable Member is mentioning unsavory things over there, uncivilized statements over there. He would not understand.
I remember the language you used. You may wish to withdraw. You're out of order.
I didn't. Uncivilized may not be out of order.
I remember you will withdraw that word now.
I withdraw it. I withdraw it. One of the great
Please
benefits.
proceed on, remember.
One of the great benefits of this bill has been the adoption, which other jurisdictions have not adopted, incidentally, has been the concept of net neutrality. And in the minister's presentation, there's been no mention of this. This has been for all investors, all internet service providers would say to themselves, this is something that they will want to consider as a result of this being included in our bill. And in relation to getting more into the specifics of the bill, in the broad overview, there are three big problems with the bill. Conceptually and ideologically, first of all, the role of the Telecommunications Agency. It ought not to be functioning, it ought to be functioning exclusively as the regulator and not to leave it to the PUC. Whether it's an economic regulator or not, but the Telecommunications Agency ought to be exclusively the regulator. And it ought to be independent from the minister. It will be very difficult for the minister to drive the liberalization of the sector. An independent telecommunications agency will be the one to drive the liberalization of the sector. And let's say, for instance, that you change the minister, and the minister that comes in shares a different position on the liberalization of the sector that may not be as aggressive or may be antipodic to its development. Then how do you ensure that the technological changes that are required, the liberalization that is required, is moving in a seemingly aggressive way? So the minister ought not to be the one driving the liberalization of the sector. It should be the Telecommunications Agency. And then in addition to that, for all intents and purposes, a minister is a politician. And a politician's life is driven by the nature of unfolding events. And in a modern world, changes happen so rapidly in the technological sector, where regulators have to give approvals and make decisions, that could cause a company to lose its competitive advantage. The second big problem that I have is the role that the PUC is going to play as the economic regulator. And I'm going to discuss that more when the PUC bill comes up next. But the third big issue that I have with the bill is that there's still unnatural distinctions between telecommunications and broadcasting. You see, in the developed world, where technological convergence happens, it means that formerly distinct industries and sectors and companies have already amalgamated and integrated. And the rest that haven't done so are doing so very rapidly. And there are a lot of questions that as it relates to the performance of the regulator currently, that has to be answered, and I'm going to ask them right now to be a litmus test on whether there is proper functioning of the regulator and what's happening as it relates to consumers' affairs. First of all, does any one of you know, or anyone in the member of the public, do you know how much you pay for a minute or for a phone call. A mobile phone call, do you know how much you pay for a minute? No, you do not know. Most of the people don't know. All they know is that your credit finishes at some point. You may or may not get a notification, and you go and put more credit in there. And that's how it is for most people. You don't know, most of you. Second of all, why is it that when you are leaving, if you would like to leave your network, why are you unable to take your number with you? Why should you not have the ability to take that number that you have built, even if it's a business or your personal attachment, whatever, you are unable to take it with you? In the developed world, this has been dealt with years ago. It's called a porting authorization code. If you would like to take that number with you, you simply fill out a form, they give you a code, a 10-digit code, and it comes with you. Third, why is it that between networks, and then hopefully eventually among networks, you are paying more than you ought to? So if you are paying $10 a minute or $20 a minute on a GT&T to GT&T call, you're also paying, you're now going to pay, whether it's 30 or 40, whatever the price is, $30 or $40 a minute into network. That is the ultimate predatory pricing arrangement that there is. And there has been nothing that has been done to effectively address that. In relation to the bill itself, there is the composition of the telecommunications agency. We find the director of telecoms being a member of the board. But the problem is that he has a vote. Most CEOs for public companies, whether they're publicly traded or public, as in public corporations, they don't have a vote on the board of directors because they effectively execute the policy and decisions and directives of the board. The chairman, for example. And there is reason as to why this ought not to happen, why the CEO ought not to have the vote. And in the broadcasting bill, for example, we had made a member of the board, NFMU, they had an ex officio place on the board, but it was a non-voting place of membership on the board. The reason why you don't want to give your CEOs voting or voting rights on boards is because a lot of the times they are asked to make decisions where they may have voted against those decisions, and then the board adopts a particular position and they now have to execute that directive. Second of all, the Act prescribes and enshrines emoluments for the CEO that has to be approved by the board. If he is going to be voting on those emoluments and pay packages, then obviously there's an inherent conflict of interest. And this is only one example. There are many examples that I can cite where the inherent conflict of interest arises and would necessitate him not having a vote on the board. Secondly, I noticed that there is also advice in Section 20B. There is advice coming from the Telecommunications Agency to the Public Utilities Commission. And there is an inherent conflict as it relates to that. And if this bill were to be sent to the select committee and the public consultation had, structurally, that type of arrangement is untenable. And for example, in section 20D, it says the role of the Telecommunications Agency is to monitor the performance of licenses. Surely it has to be licensees. And then this is reinforced by the definition section. Licenses is given a specific definition. This is in the first part of the bill. It gives a specific definition for licenses and it gives another one for licensees. Licenses don't perform. And if you had sent this to the select committee, licensees do, however, and if you had sent this to the select committee, you would be able to recognize this, and it may have been just a grammatical error or an oversight, which could be corrected on the floor, but really and truly it ought to have been sent to the select committee, laid earlier, sent to the select committee, and have us deal with this and send it back up so it could be passed. And where there has been no statements given by the Honourable Minister and nothing in the bill that would address particular areas of concern, and I'm going to state them now. For example, what happens when you deal with mergers and acquisitions, or what happens if those mergers and acquisitions turn out to be anti-competitive or antitrust? What is the position as it relates to auctioning spectrum? How is the Telecommunications Agency going to deal with that? What is the minister's view on that? And are you going to transition that spectrum into property rights and offer the same kind of protection that other property would have, save and except where it's not being used, the spectrum is not being used, so it can be reclaimed and re-auctioned? How are you going to deal with cyber attacks or sabotages to sea cables? Those very sea cables that are the backbone for the transmission of information and fiber optics contained in there. How are you going to deal with that sabotaging? This is a very large and complex bill. And since you recognize that, then you should know that by necessity, it ought to go to the select committee. And let me say that if you are laboring under any misapprehension about the nature of consultation, consultation is not only as it relates to stakeholders, consultation is as it relates to the public. There are many young, bright, tech-savvy individuals and friends that I have that would like to have a say on this bill. And they are not PVP supporters. Some of them are also supporters of you, but you have never taken the opportunity to provide a public consultation on this bill. If you feel that you're going to consult with a consumer stakeholder or one of the companies that you're going to regulate, or two of the companies that you're going to regulate, and feel that this is what all the consultation that's required, the change that is being driven is not being driven by the large companies where technology is concerned. It's driven by young people and small startup companies. When you go and you find where the funding for those technology companies are, it's for very small and young people, small companies and young people, venture capitalists. You go all across Silicon Valley and you'll find big investors that are looking for the small ideas that can be scaled up into something very large. And so the point that I'm making is consultation could never be complete, and you can never come to this National Assembly and say you are complete and satisfied with your process of consultation if you don't have public consultation, especially by your own admission. This is a very complex and technical bill, but it's also a bill that is expected to revolutionize the future for our country. Finally, and even after everything that I've said there, I know that the government's position is going to be that you're not going to send it to select committee. But there's a bigger issue that you're also missing. Because there has been no bill that has been sent to select committee. Despite all my protestations and my advances last 2 weeks ago in relation to the insurance bill, this is not going to be sent to the select committee as well. But the big problem that you're going to miss is as it relates to social cohesion. There can never be social cohesion in this country if you exclude the opposition. Always remember that in Guyana, we love two things. We love cricket, and we love politics, and we love our politicians. And the members of the public, they take their cues from their political leaders, a vast majority of them. And if your position is that you are not going to, that you would like to imbue and engender a sense of social cohesion in this country, the last thing that you would ever want to do is to exclude, at the very least, the sending of bills to select committee where we can work together. Thank you very much.
I thank the honourable member for his statement.